And we're live. It is Wednesday, February 5th, the year of our Lord 2025, 8 o'clock a.m., and our president has had a truly revolutionary idea. Faced with the world as it is, war in Ukraine, tariff disputes of his own making, threats to Taiwan, he has proposed to take over the Gaza Strip and to forcibly displace the civilian population of roughly 2 million people there who are already living in terrible conditions. I don't need to add to this audience that, Article 2.4 of the UN Charter forbids the acquisition of territory by the use of force. There's all kinds of things that forbid, the forcible displacement of civilian populations. We call that ethnic cleansing. And of course, the United States, among its many disputes with many nations, has never really been a direct party to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. But we're changing all that. It is going to be the Palestinian-Israeli-US conflict. And when we call the Gaza Strip the occupied territories, it is now, in a twist, going to be occupied by us. I will point out the big winner in this is Canada, which may buy a few extra years of independence if we get bogged down in trying to integrate the Gaza Strip. And so I've been thinking about this for the last, several hours, during most of which I was asleep, and I've given it due thought. And I think the answer is I tend to oppose it. It's a bold move. There's no doubt that there are advantages, to the plan. Some clearly on Trump's mind, some Riviera-like Mediterranean territory. It is beautiful beach area. So, there's that. There's also, he's a disruptor, and this would be disruptive, particularly to the lives of 2 million people who would be scattered to surrounding countries. And, I do think, move fast and break things, there's something to be said for that. So I can see the upsides to the president's well-considered plan for the United States to take over the Gaza Strip. But there are, if we learned anything from the Iraq experience, it's to think about unintended consequences. And I do think we should give the unintended consequences here some consideration. For example, the unintended consequences is that we would occupy the Gaza Strip. And I'm not sure that the president has fully considered the implications of that. Also, another unintended consequence is that we would have to commit the war crime of displacing 2 million people. All right, so all of that, so just thinking about the balance here, I'm just going to tend to oppose it. But again, kudos to our president for thinking out of the box. It certainly is that. Thinking disruptively, and this is what we elected him to do. And so to all my Palestinian friends, and my Israeli friends who, might not want the 50th U.S. state on their border. I will just say, um, uh, you know, I'm with you on this. It's a bad idea, and don't do it. All right. Um, but speaking of revolutionary ideas, you are watching Dog Shirt TV, and it is an effing revolution in morning television because where else can you see this very happy blonde lab, which, or golden retriever? I'm not actually, it's hard to tell anymore which it is because it's kind of faded. Where else can you see a faded golden retriever slash blonde lab that could very well be Ev's dog Muse, but isn't, um, staring into your face, smiling and talking about the U.S. annexation of the Gaza Strip at 8 o'clock in the morning? The sun is shining, the birds are chirping. It is going to be a great frickin' day. Ev, how cold is it in Montreal this morning?
Really not that bad, I think.
Yeah, it's warm here too.
I think like the sun is definitely shining, and if there's one great certainty is that there's a old guy that walks every day right by my window wearing a huge fur like Russian hat, uh, and he was wearing it today. So it's still winter, but not as cold as it was during like the past week, which really had cold weather.
Well, it's springtime in Gaza, I'm telling you, because
Uh,
the Americans are coming, and everyone's just as excited as they can be. All
the
right,
ultimate time to. No, I was going to make a bad joke.
I think you should. I think you're in for a dime,
I
in for a
will. I will.
dollar.
No, I don't. No, no. You've played really well. You've walked on the line of making jokes about a very dire situation without going too far. I think that I'll
Uh,
be
I think
cautious.
it is a really interesting question when, I mean, when the president proposes to do something that is, you know, not just outrageously stupid, but evil and but also just deranged. Um, like um what is the proper tone to take toward it? Is the proper tone um to take, like, joke, make fun of it? Is the proper tone the outrage of taking it seriously and at face value, which would be, the right moral tone, but you can't, like, but that almost gives it too much credit, right? Like, I can't get outraged about this proposal because it, first of all, it's not going to happen. And secondly, it's so outrageously dumb that, like, I can't take it that seriously. And so you end up with this weird problem of, like, do you not talk about it at all? Do you, like, act like he walked into a, fancy tea party and farted loudly, and just the polite thing to do is to sort of, um, you know, just go on with your conversation, people? Or do you, I mean, I've, like, in the first 9 minutes of this show, tried to, walk the line of sort of a Scott Shapiro like line of pretending to take it seriously. But it's actually a very tricky problem. How do you think about, you know, how do you talk about it in a way that you're not constantly, you know, turned up your knobs, all your volume knobs are not all the way turned up to 11 all the time, and you're also not taking seriously something that's just kind of like deranged and crazy, but not actually going to happen, but also that you're not ignoring the fact that the President of the United States is saying these things. I really don't know the answer to that question.
Can I follow up with another question, which is how could you be so certain that it won't happen?
So, I mean, first of all, there are layers and layers and layers of things that would have to happen in order to implement it. Um, Somebody would have to go and displace 2 million people. Who's going to do that? Are we going to send the Marines to displace 2 million Palestinians? Right? Are we going to ask Bibi Netanyahu to do that? Is that uh um they just had a ceasefire, and so there's like a little antecedent question, right? Like, you displacing 2 million people is a significant operation. And secondly, there are countries that they would have to go to, right? You'd have to have the cooperation of Egypt and probably Jordan, um, neither of which is going to be forthcoming. So, at a threshold practical level, let's just say there's some stuff that's not thought through, and that's before you get to the point that it would be a massive set of war crimes. So then there's the fact that you would have to get Congress to appropriate money for it. The you ordering U.S. troops to do something is, query whether this is even arguably um, covered by any existing um, authorization to use military force. I would argue it's obviously not, but I could imagine a straight faced argument, maybe, that it is. Maybe I can't argue. I'm just thinking about that for the first time. But if you're going to control Gaza, if you're going to have U.S. troops in Gaza for any length of time, you need to have an appropriation for that. So, how many U.S. members of Congress are going to vote for a significant force in Gaza? And so, like, I do think the look, anytime the president says he wants to do something, whether it's annexing Greenland or Canada or the Panama Canal Zone or taking over Gaza, you have to, I would say, you can't ignore the possibility that he would try completely, because he does control, to some degree anyway, the U.S. federal government. But there are a lot of things that he says he wants to do, from, you know, nuking hurricanes to, injecting bleach into people to buying Greenland, that, we don't really take any steps to do, and that are, simply a sort of logger reel stream of consciousness um, thing that comes out of his head. And so I do think you can you can often start with the assumption that it's not that he doesn't mean it. I think at the moment that he says it, he means it. It's not that, but it's that the amount of thought and planning that has gone into it is zero, and because he's just extemporaneously vocalizing. And so until there's some indication that he's actually trying to do it, you shouldn't take it seriously as a plan.
Okay, right. So I can kind of understand that you shouldn't imagine Donald Trump to be playing like 3D chess, and so there's no
Or
big.
even chess.
Okay,
right, you might be sitting, you're Bibi Netanyahu is,
Well, that's
and they're
what
sitting on
he.
another side of a chessboard, but he's playing, projectile vomiting checkers pieces.
Yeah, but BB is not the same. Is like, what is he thinking?
Well, so I don't occupy space in Bibi Netanyahu's head, but Bibi is a very sophisticated actor. And he is, though there are many, many things to object to about Bibi Netanyahu, he is not crazy and not stupid. He is, and he, over the last um, year, has played certain of his cards extremely cleverly, particularly not less with respect to Gaza than with respect to the North. And so I don't start with the assumption that he had a phone call with Trump yesterday and is expecting, the Marines to be landing at Gaza City anytime soon. He is, managing a crazy person like everybody else is, with the proviso that it is a crazy person with whom he has had a bit of a topsy-turvy relationship. By the way, they weren't speaking for a long period of time because Trump was angry that Bibi had congratulated Joe Biden. Um, on the other hand, Trump has been very good for Israeli interests as the Likud imagines them. He recognized the Golan Heights capture, the annexation. He recognized Jerusalem as the capital. And so he's been, and he's very popular in Israel in a way that is not true of Trump anywhere else. And so, look, it's a delicate thing for BB to manage because you can't, if you're BB, you can't do what I just did, which is to say, you know, are you
Yeah.
crazy? Right. And so, look, I think it probably puts BB in a slightly difficult position. I have not seen what the Israeli government's reaction to this is, but I suspect they would be pretty cautious about it. Apart from a couple of very far right members of BB's government, moreover, um, they have not, the government has not talked about displacing 2 million Palestinians, which, has a certain resonance in Israeli political history because, you know, the origins of the state involved the displacement of a fairly large number of Palestinians, though not as many, by the way, as are currently living in the Gaza Strip. And so, you would have to, like, it would be this is not the Israeli plan. This is something that the Israeli plan is itself muddled and, unclear and without, as one might say in biblical Hebrew, it's a bit of tohu vavohu. But it is not to displace 2 million Palestinians and build hotels along the beach. At least that is not any part of the public plan. And so I think it's actually a difficult proposition for BB. I don't know. I don't think it was on his bingo card
Well, let's explore the headspace of another more rational actor than Trump. I think that Jared Kushner had also flouted this idea before, and that it might actually come from him. Um, does it give any more seriousness to the plan?
So again, I mean, you can be as serious about it as you want if you're dreaming in a kind of mental masturbatory fashion. Um, and you can have your Saudi backers who, over your um, cups of tea, you know, you all kind of agree. What a great idea if we could just get rid of these inconvenient Palestinians. It's such great real estate. We could make, a kind of Monaco situation going on there. And yeah, well, we couldn't support Israeli sovereignty there, but well, what if the U.S. did it, right? So, like, you could totally imagine a kind of bullshit session where this comes up and then somebody talks about it to Trump and he gets excited about it. But again, the threshold for think about all the things that would need to happen in order for um for anything to actually be done. It's so many, and it's so incongruous with I mean, think how much more outrageous it would be than Russia invading Ukraine.
Yeah.
Right.
But you imagine it in a way like someone who thinks rationally. But if he wants to just like leverage it to get Egypt to open its borders to more people in Jordan, and like to force
So
Jordan to get more of them, and like
yeah, I am totally down with the idea that these destructive ideas can have effects, even if they don't happen. So a good example of that is, you know, you announce that you're putting a 25% tariff
tariffs.
on Canada, and then you quickly announce that it's 30 to actually you're delaying it for 30 days. But, things actually happen as a result of that initial announcement.
But
It has stock market effects. Um, uh, it has effects on the uh, all kinds of internal politics in Canada. It has effects on people's willingness to make investments, and it doesn't not matter. Just because it doesn't eventually happen. And of course, the Canadian tariffs thing are something much more plausible to actually happen than the invasion or US takeover of Gaza. Um, I'm not saying it doesn't matter. I'm saying the likelihood of it resulting in an actual US troop presence and ethnic cleansing of Gaza is, in my judgment, near zero. But look, in the chances of Trump being president in the first place were near zero, and so what the hell do I know? Joel the Nudge, what's the temperature in Minneapolis today?
Well, she's a balmy 8, which negative 13C. I looked it up just, for the international group here. And instead of a dog
appreciate
shirt, I'll just
it.
hold it. I'll just hold him here.
Yeah,
So he'll be
right
kind
up
of my shirt.
yeah, it really does have a dog shirt vibe to it,
This is
given the
Bjorn.
color of the dog and the color of the shirt.
Yeah.
What is on your mind this morning?
Well, I was thinking, and as I've watched this, parade of ridiculous rollout over the last couple of weeks, way back in the 2016 campaign, somebody at the Atlantic wrote an article called "Cruelty is the Point," and I don't know if you
Adam
remember it or not.
Serwer.
I guess you do remember it.
I do.
Yeah, and
Adam
throughout his
Serwer,
previous
who is
presidency,
an old colleague, and I wouldn't say we're friends, but friendly acquaintance, and sometime public dialogue partner, and who has been on In Lieu of Fun.
man, I'm sorry I missed that. Rats. Well, anyway, so whenever I look at his conduct and what he's proposing, like in this case, which is just so absurd, if I look at it through the lens that he proposed, where being cruel, being seen being cruel, is actually the only thing he's interested in. The tariffs would be another example. And once he's delivered his I'm this mean guy thing, he's done. It doesn't matter what happens next.
Well, so that's a really interesting question, and let me vamp on it in a few ways. A few thoughts in response. The first is it does matter in the context in which, so the the broad arc of US Canadian relations, it matters very much what happens next. Um so
Well, yes,
you know
any rational person knows that it matters a lot, but to him and
no
his
no
psyche, he,
I
you know,
I agree with you that he has a serious attention problem, and you know whether tariffs worked badly for the 70 minutes that they were in effect or whatever, and people booed the Star Spangled Banner, and so now he's on to the next thing, which is invading Gaza, and actually Canada and Mexico got a 30-day reprieve that'll turn into an indefinite one. Whether it's that or whether his attention flits back and forth, and you could have Trudeau say something that pisses him off, and then the tariffs are back right away. Right? You don't actually know. But I would say there are a lot of things for which your point is exactly right. That, he mentions them, he's committed to them, he makes his chest thumping point about them, and then they don't really happen in a deep seated kind of way. And that's most of it, actually. There is a second point that I think is important, which is sometimes he makes his chest thumping point, the dramatic rollout is the big deal. And then a court slaps a restraining order on it, and it doesn't happen because some other actor prevents it. Matt Gaetz isn't Attorney General today. Pam Bondi is, right? Now, Pam Bondi is not a great actor, and I'm not, excited that she's going to be Attorney General by any means. On the other hand, she is not Matt Gaetz, right? And but Trump got the fun of introducing Matt Gaetz. The cruelty is the point. The message to women and underage girls everywhere went out, and I don't think he minds particularly the outcome, right? And so there's 100 ways where you announce something and then some other actor says, no, you can't do that, but you don't mind because actually the announcement was the point, right? And the
right.
announcement
And
is where you baked the cruelty in.
plus, it works out perfect because then you don't have to do the work to actually do the thing. You got everything that you wanted and zero work, which
Right.
that sounds like somebody we know.
So let me give you the other side
Anyway,
of that.
I will free up the space for others. Great to see everybody.
Great
Thanks
to
for
see
everything
you,
you're
Joel.
doing.
So there is another side to that. So let me tell you a little parable about the tariffs, which Ev knows already. But I was mad about the tariffs, and I had to buy a very large amount of hardwood for my wood floors at the cabin in the woods. And so I decided, rather than buying American hardwoods, in America we grow lots of good hardwoods, but in Canada, the famous Canadian export is softwood lumber, which is mostly used as a building material, those 2x4s that, people build houses out of frame when you see a frame. That's Canadian hardwood lumber. There are also hardwood trees in Canada, and I thought, I am going to buy my hardwoods from Canada, just to say, pardon me, Jonathan Rausch, fuck you to the tariffs. Um, and so I Googled Canadian hardwoods or something, and I got some lovely looking hardwood dealer. Turned out to be a Quebecois guy in Montreal. And I put in a rather astonishingly large order for hardwoods. And he called me, and we had a nice chat about my order, and we fixed some things about the order. And then he texts me a few hours later, you know, there's likely to be a 25% tariff on this. Now, let us pause a moment over the nature of a tariff. A tariff is not a tax on the supplier, no matter what Donald Trump thinks. A tariff is not a tax on the country. Canada was not going to be told to pay an extra 25% of what was actually a $3,000 order of wood. The person who was being asked, told, directed to pay the extra 25% was me. And I texted him back, I ordered from you because of the tariffs. I wanted to give a little fuck you to Trump. And he texted me back 4 crying with laughter emojis. And then an hour or two later, the tariffs were suspended. So I get all the virtue signaling of buying Canadian and none of the additional have to pay the tariff. But I will say, as a parable of the tariffs, it's an interesting one. This would have cost me, an American consumer, about $800 extra to buy a product, and the result, of course, of which is that I would buy, except for the theatrical quality of buying it, the normal rational person would buy less or none or from somewhere else. And so what you're actually doing is you're raising prices to American consumers by reducing the business of Canadian, in this case, some guy in Montreal who sells hardwoods. I don't see who the winner is, except, I suppose, there's an American hardwood lumber dealer who I might use instead. And so what we saw in the first round is that the steel and aluminum tariffs, which did apply to Canada for a while, it raised the price of all kinds of stuff in the United States. It did protect steel and aluminum jobs in the United States at the cost of a larger impact on the economy. So I would say, as a genuine old-time free trader, that's a bad trade. And we should... I should be able to pay less for Canadian hardwood, and my guy in Montreal, whose name I don't remember, and probably would have trouble pronouncing anyway.
Oh, he was a real French Canadian Montreal guy.
Oh yeah.
That's super cool, actually. Like the fact that the tariffs have created some kind of bonding moment between the two nations. I really like that.
Well, so, a bonding moment, but it's not like I'm one guy, and he's one guy. And we had a nice exchange. But if you actually look at it, it's a completely destructive dynamic.
Of course it is.
I have to pay $800 or $900 more for product that he wants to sell me at a much more reasonable cost, and he's gonna lose a lot of business. And
I mean, I'm not saying yay tariffs. I'm just saying, like, if as a kind of way of protesting these measures, we can, instead of like booing each other at hockey games, we can talk and call each other and like fight this with, let me say, the most cheesy thing ever, but like with kindness and good relationships. That's one option I would favor.
so I would too, but I have to say, in defense of the fans who booed the Star Spangled Banner, I actually think that's totally legit. And it pains me to see American friends booing the national anthem of the United States. It pains me to see, I think of um, the proper relationship between U.S. and Canadian teams and fans at a hockey game is one of friendly rivalry, um and so that's like painful to watch. And but the United States, in the person of our president, took a dramatic action uh, to hurt a lot of Canadians. And if you're a hockey fan, I don't know how you get to express that other than and so I actually think the I look, I never support expressions of anti-Americanism, but if I were Canadian and I experienced like the Star Spangled Banner playing on that, like I would have something to say about it. And I do think the removal of U.S. products from liquor stores in across Canada was constructive. And look, what caused Trump precisely to shift gears and slap that delay on it? Whether it was, I suspect it was just the movement of the stock market, but I think like I do think there is both person to person relationships that this we should cultivate in response to this, but I also think just expressions of we're pissed off is totally legitimate. Hello, Shane Harris.
Hi, Ben. I'm sorry I'm late arriving to your show.
You're not late. I believe I texted you that you should show up anytime in the next hour. And
Very kind of you.
this is anytime in the next hour. We were just talking about the Canadian tariffs and the president's bold plan to take over the Gaza Strip. And but but you but the Wall Street Journal reported last night or this morning
It was last night, yeah.
something that I think our listenership, readership, watchership needs to be aware of, that you and I were texting about yesterday. So bring us up to speed. What happened? Another bold move by the new administration.
Yes. There's so many of them. Don't you feel emboldened? Yes. No. So this was this. This is why I wanted to jump on and talk about this, 'cause I think it's important. So the CIA personnel yesterday received their version of what is kind of colloquially been referred to as the fork in the road memo, which is, the Twitter-esque kind of memo that comes from Elon Musk and company saying, here are the big personnel changes we have in store. And what it's essentially offering people is this kind of buyout, an opportunity to leave government service earlier than expected in this effort that the administration seems to be up to downsize the size of the federal workforce. Should be clear, it's not even clear that they have the authority to do this, but like you could say that about basically everything that that the Musk team has been doing. And I think this is really important for a couple reasons. I mean, one, we hadn't yet heard about the intelligence community workforce receiving this kind of a memo per se, or at least not the CIA specifically. But also it's not entirely clear to me that there is any kind of inventory accompanying this that would, try to determine, are there certain employees we would not like to take some kind of early retirement or buyout. Um, it's kind of this sledgehammer approach to personnel that's been happening, and I just think it's notable that it is also happening at the CIA right now, where of course many of the personnel, by the way, are undercover. It's a different kind of employment situation with different kinds of constraints, but it seems to be happening at the CIA. So the Musk revolution is coming for Langley too, I guess.
And do we have a sense of um, what the objective is? Because you can have more than one objective in offering mass buyouts to agency personnel. One is downsizing, right? Do you hate government, hate, the intelligence, everything's bloated, so we're going to shrink it. Um, the other is more like what they're doing at the FBI, which is to say, um, hey, this agency is behaving in ways that we don't like. Let's get rid of all the personnel we can and replace them with people who will do our bidding. What do you, what is your impression of what the objective here is?
I think it's more of the latter. It's not merely we have too many federal government employees, let's downsize them. By the way, the Doge goal of saving whatever number of trillions of dollars it is, you're not going to get there by
Right.
reducing payroll. That's
No,
objectively.
the only way to get there is to dramatically reduce military spending, which, by the way, is a terrible idea. And number two, to dramatically reduce entitlements,
Correct.
which is also a terrible
Which
idea.
Donald Trump is never going to do. So I think this is about giving people who aren't on board with the team and the Trump agenda or the Make America Great agenda or whatever it is, but people who don't want to work in a Trump administration, is to give them the chance to go out the door. And I think that the goal here would be to then replace them with people that are more ideologically aligned and committed or are willing to work in the administration. Now, to be clear, there are people who will take early retirement or who will just leave because they don't want to work for the Trump administration. But I think this order is designed to some degree to facilitate it. There's another kind of parallel effort that's happening that I think hasn't gotten as much attention, which is that across agencies, and the CIA is not an exception to this, they've been told to identify employees who are on probationary status. So in the
Right.
case of the CIA, it's people who've been officers for 2 years or less. Why is that? Well, those people are easier to fire under the civil service system. And I think that there's probably an expectation of, or a thinking that here's an easy place that we can root people out because, after all, if you joined in the past 2 years, you de facto joined in the Biden administration. One thing that this really points up to, and it's just bears worth repeating, and we're going to have to repeat it a lot, is that Donald Trump and the people working for him fundamentally do not understand the culture of these places that they are now trying to gut. They think that if you joined the CIA or the FBI in the last 2 years, it's because you did it as some sort of expression of political support for Joe Biden or because you're a Democrat.
Right.
And maybe there are some people who did, but that's just such a fundamental, profound misunderstanding that these are mission-driven organizations, the CIA and the FBI. It takes a long time to join them, by the way. It takes
And
a long
and
time
a
to
much
live in
longer
them.
period of time to acculturate people once
Absolutely.
they're in them.
Absolutely. I mean, the people, and I know young people who work in these agencies, they went to work for them because they wanted to work for the FBI or they wanted to work for the CIA because they looked at it as like it's an amazing opportunity. It's a really cool freaking job. And they didn't do it because they say, what I really want to do is go work for Joe Biden on the DEI front lines. It's a
Right.
level of derangement that is motivating these actions, which are incredibly malicious, deeply short-sighted, and are not really being done with any precision, and just a total, I think, not just an ignorance for how these organizations work, but a real hostility for them. I mean, Donald Trump believes that they are stocked with people who are against him, that are using the powers of government against him and his supporters. And it's just, it is a kind of a broad generalization that is a really profoundly misguided one and dangerous, I think.
Yeah, so one more question on this. What have you heard about how this is being received inside the agency?
People are afraid. People are nervous. They are. I hope to write about this later today and or tomorrow morning. Um, People I've talked to are looking at what's happening at the FBI and wondering if that is what is in store for them. And some of the same things are happening at the FBI with this fork in the road mentality, et cetera. But like the actual singling out of people who were involved in the
Right.
FBI case of certain investigations, two in particular, well, three, I guess, really. Um, uh, People at CIA are wondering the same thing. Is that something like that going to happen here? Do we need to be worried about that? And I think that creating that culture of anxiety and anticipation, is probably part of the point. If it wasn't the point, it has certainly become a byproduct of it. But they're watching this very closely. I mean, the CIA and the FBI are different organizations, but they kind of, move around in some of the same atmospheres sometime, and they get it. They're deeply mission-oriented cultures that are supposed to be apolitical, and they're watching what's happening there and wondering, does it happen here next? And by the way, they have a new director, John Ratcliffe, who in his communications with the agency so far has made very clear he's on the team, and they're watching Tulsi Gabbard about to become the DNI and their ultimate boss. So all of this is happening
Right.
at the same time.
Speaking of the FBI, what do you make of the Emile Beauvais memo?
Is this the one? Which one are we talking
So
about?
this is the one that Warner released
Yeah.
last night that we previously only had the characterization of from the Driz, as he is known,
The Driz, yes.
In his email to FBI staff.
Yeah, so I think that it's kind of a great, actually, I'm pulling it up here as we're talking. It is kind of an excellent way of thinking about how how the administration is thinking about the FBI right now. So, I mean, one thing that is pretty startling about it to me is, of course, that it has names in it of individual FBI personnel. Um, which means, of course, that means that the administration has been paying attention to this and has people who are there. It is right there. Uh, right, employees to be terminated, and it helpfully names them for us. And then, of course, it also has David Sundberg on there, as I had earlier reported that he was going to be out. But then, as if that's kind of not chilling enough, then you see in this next paragraph the events around January 6th. Well, that's going to be between 4,000 and maybe upwards of 6,000 or so different employees. That's just an astonishing number. That's a significant percentage of the FBI's workforce. So basically, anybody who worked on this case is now might be fired and will be questioned. And we knew some of this, but to see it really spelled out, and I have to say, what is a pretty hostile memo. And if you read the
Yes.
top of it, it is basically like, as we've all known, you run a corrupt organization that's counter to the American people, et cetera, et cetera. It's very high on rhetoric. And then, of course, there's the reference to US v. Hania, which remains a mystery to me, but I think I have a theory that Brian Greer shares about what that's about. But
Yeah. So for those who don't know, as you can see in the memo, there's he's asking about people who participated in two cases. One is the January 6th stuff, and the second is US v. Hania, that is Ismail Hania, the now no longer among the living leader of Hamas. And so there's been a fair bit of speculation as to why are they going on a witch hunt for FBI agents who worked on the Hania case. What is your theory about that?
my theory has been that for reasons that I cannot explain, um, people in the Trump world believe that the Justice Department and the FBI did not move aggressively to go after Hamas and drag their feet or maybe looked the other way. I mean, like, to be clear, I'm imagining this idea, right? That they're thinking like it's all the woke FBI agents who think that Hamas is not so bad, and they're in league with all the college students that love Hamas and the DEI people, and Hamas is DEI, therefore FBI is DEI, loves Hamas. It's crazy. But I think that this is probably what they're thinking is, and my guess would be either because they were tipped off to this or because, somebody just told them to go looking here. They think they're going to find evidence of FBI agents saying, like, well, we really shouldn't prosecute Hamas because, they're actually on the side of the righteous or something like that. But what's crazy about this is that the case was filed under seal not long after the October 7th attacks. So, like, it was filed. It just, you didn't know about it. So the FBI and the DOJ did appear to move with some alacrity towards prosecuting.
Right, although I suppose if you were inclined in the direction of that conspiracy theory, you could say they waited until after, only after October 7th. And if the United States had indicted Ismail Haniyeh and a bunch of people we don't have custody over, 3 years ago, but not 5 years ago, right? Like they were all, we could have prevented. I suppose you could fantasize that. But all right, well, Shane, drop in any time that you have news you want to discuss or bring up, and keep plugging away. And it's great to see you.
Me see you too. Good morning. Have a good day, everybody. Have fun at
You
the
too.
office. Bye.
So, Ev, what is on your mind this morning?
I'm reading. I'm reading a bunch of stuff on education policies. I am like theoretical approaches to education policies, which are going to be at the forefront of like the debate eventually. Actually, and interestingly, I have I think booked for next week two people who have created an organization called Youth for Privacy. That could be interesting to talk to about all of what's happening at the Department of Education.
Interesting. How does privacy connect to the education policy discussion?
Well, aren't they going over the loans and the PII of?
I see. Yeah, that does seem to be happening, though the exact contours of it are a little bit unclear to me at this stage. I do think it will clarify over the next few weeks. But yeah, I do expect there is all kinds of spillage, not just, by the way, at the Department of Education, but all kinds of spillage of private information and protected information by a variety of statutes, right? I expect there's educational material that's being spilled, medical information, and material covered by the Privacy Act. And so, yeah, education is one component of that.
Yeah, do you have any idea of like what kind of data can be held by the Department of Education? Is it only like
So I don't know the answer to that. Education policy being not my area at all, but first of all, there is a dedicated sectoral privacy statute called the Federal Education Records Privacy Act, FERPA, I believe, that protects all kinds of data related to people's educational records. Now, how much of that, I think of that as more like people's enrollment data and transcripts and, like it more is about universities, but I suspect the Department of Education has a wealth of data that's covered by it. The more, but even if that's not true, um, what certainly is true is that the Department of Education is covered by the Privacy Act, which forbids the disclosure or compromise of kind of any information that the government holds about individuals in a system of records. So if you keep a database of, you know, French Canadians who appear on YouTube live shows, um, you know, the fact that Eve Gaumond is in that database is, if it's a government database, is protected by the Privacy Act. And I think, you know, they are buying themselves a world of liability in the Privacy Act sphere. There was one litigation that was filed. There's at least one filed already on this. But I think there's going to be a lot more. And to be frank, I just don't think they have been careful about avoiding, you know, about thinking through how to do the things they are trying to do in compliance with the Privacy Act. You know, that is not a federal government function to enforce the Privacy Act. It's not like, you know, the fact that you control the Justice Department means there's no liability for that. There are individual plaintiffs, right? And assuming that Elon Musk is judgment proof because he's so rich that he doesn't care how much you sue him for, that's not true of the individuals who work for him, right? It's also not true of the agencies, which may be defendants in this. So I think and also, of course, there's the possibility of injunctive relief in some of these areas. And so I think, you know, we are right at the stage where the pushback is just beginning. And it's going to take, you can do the shock and awe, cruelty is the point stuff in hours or days, but the pushback takes weeks or months. And I think, you know, we're just starting to explore how effective that can be. And if the first Trump administration is any guide, the answer is, you know, they announce things and then they lose in court because they actually don't lawyer them well. And so, you know, watch this space, and you know, whether the educational records are a locus of that or not, I don't think we'll know until further down, but it's certainly one category that we got to be thinking about. So, Ev, before we break, I have an important question for you.
Go ahead.
Have you tried to hack DeepSeek yet?
No, no, I haven't. I've read what EJ did, which is super interesting. Like, DeepSeek is claiming, is it Gaza?
No, well, Gaza it acknowledges as a Palestinian territory, although clearly it didn't. This was predated the president's action, but it was.
I mean, maybe it was known actually. Maybe they were like trying.
It was a Korean island that it claimed for China, and of course it claims Crimea as an integral part of China, and so, you know, I think there's real questions about what DeepSeek will have to say about all kinds of things, and I think it's your holy mission to explore, shall we say, the parameters of DeepSeek's worldview.
I will. Though I haven't figured out an angle yet.
Well, I I would be interested to know, for example, what DeepSeek thinks of various issues that China has positions on. What does it think about the Dalai Lama? What does it think
It's pretty
about?
well. It's been shown already. I think that, like, and I mean, there is liability for, um, like, China has rules about AI. Then all content that goes against the regime is prohibited. So I think that the way they design their model is to avoid liability. So all
So I would
issues
be
we imagine are like, I've seen a number of examples of, like, if you expect DeepSeek to say, like, Tiananmen Square, for instance, doesn't exist. It's like,
Yeah, so it would be super interesting just to catalog some of those, but also to look at issues where China's position is a little bit less public, like, well, I mean, or it can be very public, but less noticed, right? So yeah, there's the nine dash line stuff, but what about China has a long-standing border dispute with India that actually produces, like, what would we learn from DeepSeek about that? What would we learn about from DeepSeek about various um uh about Chinese companies that are uh about which there is controversy, like, ByteDance or Huawei or, so I don't know. I think, exploring the worldview, it's just a really important Gaumond project.
right. And
We have got,
yeah, go ahead.
we have
You
got to
can talk
wrap up.
about cheating either. Go. Yeah, we got to wrap up.
We've got to wrap. Folks, we're going to be back tomorrow. The show continues. The show out there and the show here. You never know. Are we going to annex Antarctica today? By the way, interesting that Trump has so much interest in Greenland and so little interest in Antarctica. Um, we wouldn't have to buy it. We would just, a few troops could secure it. Um, uh, we're going to be back tomorrow. We're going to talk about it all. I don't know who, as today, I didn't know Shane was going to show up. I didn't know who the co-hosts were going to be. Same is true tomorrow. Sometimes, we plan these things. Sometimes we don't. We're going to be back. Keep the faith and try to have some fun.